It's time to tell the truth. New York Times have done essentially an attack piece on our country and Her Majesty the Queen by claiming that, well, the Brits are spending all this money on the funeral of Her Majesty the Queen and people are dying left, right, and centre in Britain. Really? Welcome back to the show. Let's talk about New York Times and all the other lefties who are essentially using certain things as a political tool to attack everybody else. They are talking about the cost of living crisis and wasting money. If you really want to talk about wasting money, talk about the political classes in Britain and in America. They did a piece, the New York Times, saying that Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, which will involve elaborate processions and vigils and rituals, will be paid for by British taxpayers. Well, yeah, she was the head of state. And then they say, well, it's going to be massive because energy prices, high inflation, people are suffering, and the government is not, that doesn't really care about this. Okay. So people who don't know the cost, they will freak out. They say, well, yeah, it looks very expensive. And people need to be supported. And where is the government support? The New York Times says, well, the British government have not really announced any financial support for the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis. Let's talk about the truth, New York Times. When we talk about the estimated cost of the funeral and everything, it's $9 million. This is, again, your estimate in terms of your currency. So to refer with the way the currency exchange is going, it's basically the same amount, £9 million. But that's the cost. And if you want to talk about the truth, look at this. I mean, this is just the gist of it, essentially. The cost of Her Majesty the Queen's funeral and all the ceremonies would fund the NHS for just over 23 minutes. Because the NHS is so big that even that much money is not going to be enough. So you're not really taking a year worth of NHS spending. Not only that, you talk about financial support. I hate to be defending this government, this Tory government, but being objective helps. Liz Truss has already announced a £100 billion energy package, and it's now finally been implemented to support people. New York Times says, well, the UK government are not really doing anything to help people. I'm not even defending the Tory government, but this is, they are doing something finally after Boris Johnson. So calm down, guys. And then it's got so bad that even Benjamin Butterworth, the centre-left Benjamin Butterworth, the Blairite Butterworth, has cancelled his New York Times subscription because they went too far. NYT. I mean, seriously. Also, dear left-wing Americans, if you want to talk about the cost when it comes to the head of state, ceremonies and formal events and officials, okay, you've got Her Majesty the Queen's death and the head of state, the death of head of state and the funeral, which is not that regular. Compare it to what you do every 4 years after your presidential elections. You know how much you guys spent on inauguration? President Trump's inauguration cost about $200 million. Even Obama's 2009 inauguration, that was ages ago, that cost $170 million. Compare that to our $9 million. And, which one's a waste of money? Is it every 4 years that amount of money that we just said for the new president? Or is it like 9 million for one funeral after, well, almost 100 years, 70 years actually, 70 years that we've had. Embarrassing, absolutely embarrassing, New York Times. We're going to come back in half an hour. We're going to tell you about the deep state in the United Kingdom. So subscribe to the channel. I'm Tousi and we are the media.